Ryan Nobles was in Virginia for a big win. This looked like it was going to be close. And Ryan, I heard your report at 6 o'clock this morning. Not even close, right?
Not at all, Bill. In fact, I was talking to somebody pretty high up in the Republican campaign last night, and this person told me about a half an hour before the polls closed that it was going to be a Dem sweep and described it to me as being over very early on. You know, Republicans for a long time thought that the polls were closing in this race. They felt positive about their candidate, Ed Gillespie, who's a former RNC chairman, a former aide to George W. Bush, that he was, kind of walking this tightrope when it came to Donald Trump, where, he wasn't necessarily embracing Trump the man, but he was embracing his policies, and they were hoping that would pull the Trump supporters in while at the same time retaining moderate Republicans and independents. And that absolutely did not happen.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any way you can describe what happened here last night as, just a direct repudiation of Donald Trump and his policies. And this isn't me saying this before your people start tweeting you. I talked to a Republican congressman last night, Scott Taylor, who's from Virginia Beach, who said to me that it's a direct reflection on how voters feel about Donald Trump. And Virginia is not a blue state. This is a purple state. And it's a 50-50 election every year, and last night was certainly not a 50-50 election. So Republicans have to see this as a wake-up call.
Okay, so here's what the president's going to say, and probably already I believe he already has said this, is that Gillespie did not embrace him enough. Had he come along with the president, had he allowed the president to, I know the president might have done some robocalls for him, but hey, this is Gillespie's fault. He should have been all in on me, President Trump. What do you think?
I mean, I certainly, Gillespie didn't go the whole way, if you could put it that way. They certainly could have held a rally with Trump. The White House was open to that, and his campaign was not. But I don't know if you can say that he didn't embrace him enough. I mean, they sent out direct mail pieces that highlighted the president's tweets. They did that robocall from the president with the president's voice that dropped Monday night and Tuesday morning. I just don't see that this margin, and then when you look at the exit polls that clearly reflect, one of the main drivers for people to go to the polls was a dissatisfaction with Donald Trump, that you can point to anything other than that. So, this is a typical spin from the White House, but, I feel, there are a lot of Republicans, establishment Republicans, that were disappointed in the campaign that Gillespie ran, because he played into this culture war that Trump has been championing over the past, last year. So, a lot of people, in many respects, feel that Gillespie sold his soul to the Trump wing of the party, and this ended up being the result. So Trump can spin it all he wants, but, this was a full, and it wasn't just here, it was in other parts of the country as well, where Republicans just got hammered.
So we're a year away from a very, very, very important election. But at the same time, Ryan, the Democrats are in disarray as well. I realize they had a big night last night, but this Bernie Sanders versus the mainstream or the Clinton portion of the party could be a real problem for them coming up next year.
I do think you're right about that, Bill, and I think what's interesting, and I think Virginia gives us some insight into that as well, because the candidate who won here last night is not a Bernie Sanders candidate. Ralph Northam is a lieutenant governor. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon, an Army veteran. He speaks with a Southern drawl. He is a moderate Democrat. I've covered him for a very long time when he was in the state Senate. There were, at one time he flirted with actually switching parties. He voted for George W. Bush twice. This isn't a guy that is a Bernie Sanders candidate. So I think mainstream Democrats are going to point to this election and say, listen, if we're going to beat Donald Trump, we need someone who is a Democrat, who's clearly a Democrat, supports Democratic policies, but isn't going to be all the way to the far left where Bernie Sanders is. And I almost view last night as somewhat of a market correction, that this is really where the American public is. The American public doesn't live on the fringes of either side of the party.
Right,
They're really more in the middle. And Ralph Northam reflects that. That's the kind of candidate he is.
This is the first move back towards the middle in the country.
It very well could be.
Yeah.
It very well could be. But the question is then, so we're going to have a midterm election here, and we'll see what happens with the midterms. If Democrats pick up big gains in the midterms, that's going to fuel more of this momentum for them. But then we're going to get right back into a divisive primary season that's going to push both parties back to the far fringes. So, and that Bernie Sanders is probably going to run. So when you have the more moderate mainstream candidates, both Democrat and Republican, in this race, are they going to be marginalized? And I think that, you're right. The Democrats have got to figure that out and find some sort of unifying message. They found a unifying issue that motivates Democrats of all stripes to come out, and that is opposition to Donald Trump. That's what happened last night. That only gets you so far. You get a certain level of support because you are opposed to someone, but you still have got to find a candidate that people support because they like that candidate. And that's going to be the Democrats' biggest challenge ahead to 2020.
Well, what's interesting, you take this race, NY22, Claudia Tenney, Anthony Brindisi. Here you have a relatively moderate district, but that does certainly leans Republican. But so you take an Anthony Brindisi, who's a Democrat. Democrats can't do to Brindisi what has happened with the Tea Party and with the taking it far to the right. They can't move all the way to the left because somebody all the way to the left could not win in the 22nd congressional district. So here you have Brindisi, who certainly has many of those issues, is on the side of Democrats, but he's far to the middle and even a little bit to the right when it comes to gun issues and stuff like that are very important for the 22nd district.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specific ins and outs of that race as much as I would have maybe 10 years ago. But, what I know of Anthony Brindisi is he's very much in the Ralph Northam style of Democratic politics. And what I mean by that is he is a candidate who views the local issues and the local identity of his community first before he embraces the identity of his party nationally.
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't mean that these Republican interest groups and the Republican Party itself are not going to try and paint him as someone who's going to be Nancy Pelosi's crony in Washington.
Yep.
And here's the thing for someone like Brindisi, he's going to have to find his own voice. And there's a huge battle in Washington right now over whether or not Nancy Pelosi should stay in leadership. And every single Democratic candidate across the country is going to be asked this question: would you vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House if the Democrats take the majority? And how does he answer that question? I think that's going to be an important way to define his candidacy.
Yeah.
And that, these national figures all across the board, whether it be Trump, Pelosi, whoever they may be, are going to weigh heavily in these races. I think when candidates are able to fight through that, become their own person in their own districts, that's when they're the most successful.
Yeah.
But I tell you, that is a hard thing to do because there's going to be millions and millions of dollars spent in these big elections because, especially after what happened here tonight, Republicans are not going to want to take the risk of losing any seat that they currently hold.
Very interesting, Ryan. On this gun issue, which is such a big issue up here, every time there's another shooting, it puts more and more pressure on a moderate Democrat to move to the left when it comes to guns, and that is a dangerous place, especially in upstate New York. It's going to be interesting to see what comes out of all of this. So, all right, Ryan, interesting stuff. Thanks, man. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.